What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and little bit of irony, because I am doing a thrash metal video while wearing a Motley Crue shirt. Weird how that works out, but I digress with that. So it's been quite a while. It's been almost 2 months since I've done an episode of this series where I'd be recommending albums from a certain subgenre of metal and recommend those albums to beginners who want to get into these certain subgenres of metal. I first went overboard with death metal, and that got a huge response, and even some video responses courtesy of Necrotic Nick from Thralls of Metal. The last one I did, which was towards the end of 2021 in December, was the traditional heavy metal albums for beginners, and I was debating in my mind what genre did I want to tackle next, and I thought, well, why don't we go to my favorite style of metal there is, and that's thrash metal. Now, I was struggling for a while to figure out how I was going to comprise this list, because I love thrash metal to death. Even though I have more death metal albums in my collection, I can go ahead and say I think thrash metal is the superior genre, and it's my personal favorite. But trying to figure out how I wanted to present this list, it was difficult, because I wanted to do, at one point, 20 albums, but I learned my lesson from the death metal video. I thought maybe that'd be a bit too overboard, so I whittled it down to 10. For differing reasons. Now, some of these albums are going to seem quite obvious, but again, you need these albums to really begin your journey to eventually dive deeper into the world of thrash metal. So for the first album I'm choosing, it's going to be an obvious one, but I picked this one because it's a more generalized choice, and the impact and the legacy it left across not just thrash, but all of metal. And that is Metallica, Master of Puppets. I mean, this album, maybe a little bit biased because this is my personal favorite album of all time, but really when you boil it down to all the ingredients that this album has, it's not hard to see why this is my favorite album of all time, as well as one of the most influential albums across all of metal. Not just thrash, but in all of metal. And here you get some classics like Battery, the title track Master of Puppets, Sanitarium, and Orion, the classic instrumental, and rest in peace Cliff Burton. But then you get some underrated cuts on here, such as The Thing That Should Not Be, where they were getting a little bit more groovy and experimental, and then you get to some thrashers like the Disposable Heroes and Damage Incorporated, but even Leper Messiah was a really cool, like, chugging tune for the most part. But yeah, top to bottom, it's an all-time classic, and the thrash moments are really amped up on here, especially, like I said, in Battery, Master of Puppets, Disposable Heroes, and Damage Incorporated, and even a little bit of Sanitarium towards the end after the final chorus. But yeah, this is a classic album, not just in thrash, but in all of metal, and I think this would be the easiest album to get into this world of thrash, considering it's been so influential across the board. So now on to the next one, and this would be the second album that you could look at as upon impact and legacy, but also this could be a great starting point to get into the more extreme side of thrash metal, because this album was kind of seen as the benchmark for all things extreme in the mid-'80s. And that album is, of course, Slayer, Rain and Blood. I mean, this album is a gem in all of music, and some people even look to this album as the greatest thrash metal album of all time. I would slightly disagree on that. It's definitely top 2 or 3 for sure. Probably top 2. But it's a masterpiece. I mean, songs like Angel of Death and Raining Blood, of course, 2 classic tracks. But also other great songs like Necrophobic, Altar of Sacrifice, Jesus Saves, Criminally Insane, Postmortem, Piece by Piece, Reborn, Epidemic. I mean, all these songs just rip. And it's only like 28, 29 minutes. It's fast, short, sweet to the point, and packed with riffs and crazy dive bomb leads, amazing drum work, and chaotic vocals. So yeah, Rain and Blood. This is definitely the album that kind of pushed thrash into the more extreme side of metal. Even though thrash is often seen as the founding father of all things extreme metal, this album pushed that extremity to another level. And that's why I would recommend for a beginner of thrash that wants to get into the more extreme side of the genre, this is a great album to start. Now we move on into ones that are more oriented towards fans of other subgenres of metal that want to get into thrash. So for this first choice, what if this hypothetical listener is more of a classic metal fan, but wants to get into thrash, but wants to find a nice meeting ground? Well, I couldn't think of a better album to represent that. Maybe I could have done the same with Master of Puppets, but I wanted to give a nod to an underrated band, and that is Overkill with The Years of Decay. I think overall, in terms of the thrashiness, this album is very thrashy, and I think this is when they really started to become more straightforward thrash, whereas the first few albums, yeah, they're thrash albums, but they had a little bit more of that punky bite to it. Here, I think they kind of solidified their sound and brought in their classic metal influences, especially on the track Playing with Spiders / Skull Crusher. Gets flat out doomy on that track, like very much like a Black Sabbath tune, but a lot of these gallops that you would hear on this album are very inspired by Iron Maiden. The melodies and like some of the more darker sounding melodies, again, very Iron Maiden, and even Judas Priest inspired. Like in certain tracks you even get a little bit of like a Judas Priest, like pump up your fist kind of vibe, especially on tracks like Time to Kill, Elimination, Evil Never Dies. But as far as like the more classic metal oriented stuff, of course, even on songs like Who Tends the Fire and the title track especially, those songs really drive forth that classic metal influence. So if you're a fan of classic metal but want to get into thrash and want to find a good meeting ground, I'd say Overkill, The Years of Decay is the album for you. So now we get into what if this hypothetical listener is more a fan of prog, or more fans of like more technical playing and technical or progressive song structures, or just flat out musicianship. Well, there's no better album to exemplify that than Rust in Peace by Megadeth. I mean, this is also up there among the greatest thrash albums, and even among the greatest metal albums of all time. But songs like Holy Wars, The Punishment Due, Hangar 18, Tornado of Souls, the title track, Take No Prisoners, Five Magics, really every song on here, for the most part, are all amazing. And really the reason why I say this could be a good lure in for the fan of more technical playing or prog music, because the song structuring on a lot of these songs are very complex, very progressive lenient, and also there's a lot of great musicianship going on here. Of course, Dave Mustaine being one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Same with Marty Friedman, David Ellefson evolving as a bassist, and Nick Menza showcasing that he was a hell of a drummer when he was around during this time. And this album, not only did it push Megadeth to new heights, also helped push thrash to new heights, as this went platinum pretty quickly when it came out. And kind of interesting to hear that it went platinum, considering how complex these songs were in the songwriting department. But if you're a fan of prog or of technical play, musicianship, or just complex songwriting, Megadeth Rust in Peace is the album for you into the world of thrash. Now this next one, what if this hypothetical listener is more of a black metal fan, or a fan of like a more raw sound? Well, I think when it comes to who does black and thrash the best, at least as a pioneer, I couldn't think of a better example than Sodom, and I went with Persecution Mania, mainly because While the production on this album was much better than on Obsessed by Cruelty, it was still raw and gritty. Just more, it was a little cleaner, but it still had grit to it. And of course, Tom Angel Ripper's vocals on here were a big inspiration on not only black metal, but even death metal. But as far as like tremolo riffs and playing really insanely fast, this album definitely set a new level for Sodom. Tracks like Nuclear Winter, Electrocution, Enchanted Land, Christ Passion, Bommenheigl, and even this version has the tracks from the Experts of Sodomy EP, and those were great tracks. But yeah, Persecution Mania, if you're more of a fan of raw, gritty, evil-sounding thrash, that is, or more black metal, if you're a fan of old black metal but want to get into thrash, I think Sodom Persecution Mania would be a great album to kind of lure you into it, because there were still some elements of the raw, more blackened days of the band, but much more thrash metal centric. I think this would be a great album for a black metal fan that maybe isn't into thrash, but would be a great gateway to get into thrash through black metal. So definitely give this one a listen. Now we go on to the other side of the coin. What if this hypothetical listener is more of a death metal fan? And while there is a great fusion, death thrash, I think in terms of like a band or an album in this case that exemplifies thrash metal but with some death metal moments, I'm going to go with Sepultura and the album Arise. I could have went with Schizophrenia or Beneath the Remains, but I went with Arise because I feel like the death metal moments were definitely more on full display in terms of like slowing songs down and getting really chuggy and chunky and heavy. But the thrash is still pretty much intact on this album, and there's more focus on songwriting. Also, Max Cavalera's vocals kind of sit in between being a thrash metal vocalist and a death metal vocalist, because it's much lower and deeper and growlier. So I think if you're a fan of death metal that for some reason skipped over thrash but want to get into something that's just as extreme and heavy as death metal, I would say Sepultura Arise. Plus, not to mention, this was recorded in Morrisound Studios, the home of the Florida death metal scene, essentially. So yeah, I think if you are a death metal fan that just skipped over thrash, this would be a great kind of bridging point between the two genres. Even Possessed Seven Churches could have fit this descriptor as well, or even Creator, Pleasure to Kill would have been a good choice for like a death metal fan that wants to get into thrash. But I think in terms of like proper bridge between death metal and thrash metal, I think Arise by Sepultura is the more obvious and clear-cut choice. At least for me. So now for these next 4 that I have, these are actually going to be ones personally that, the next 4. I was just double checking, so I thought I had more than I thought I had, but alright. So these next 4 are going to be for more different vibes or styles, so to speak. So for this next one, what if this hypothetical listener is more of a fan of party style music and just want to have a good time? Well, I think a great album to kind of express that in the old days would be Exodus, Bonded by Blood. Yes, I don't have the original cover, but sue me. But I feel like in terms of like the more uplifting style and like just want to have a good time, drink beers and just headbang and get into a mosh pit, I think Exodus, Bonded by Blood is the album for a thrash fan, or for a fan of metal that just loves to just drink and just go nuts. This album's like the soundtrack for it. Songs like the title track, the song Exodus, A Lesson in Violence, Metal Command, Piranha, Then There Were None, A Lesson in Violence. Yeah, I already said that. Oh, Strike of the Beast. That's what I was meaning to say. But yeah, all these songs are just raw and fun and heavy and fast. And rest in peace, Paul Bailoff. This was the only album he ever did with the band, studio album-wise. And it's still, in my opinion, the best Exodus album of all time. And I'm not even the world's biggest Exodus fan. I do respect and love what they do. But I just like a lot of other thrash bands more. But I can't deny the party vibe that this album has. Of course, for this criteria, I could have went with something like Municipal Waste or Tankard, but I went with Exodus Bonded by Blood because I think it fits more of a party vibe than anything else, at least back in the day. So definitely check it out. Now for this next one, what if this hypothetical listener likes to hear more melody and cleaner vocals as opposed to the thrash shouts or even growling vocals at times, or shrieks? Well, I think the best album to exemplify more melody and clean vocals, or cleaner vocals, like actual singing, is Anthrax Among the Living. Simply put, because the melodies that this album has are just infectious, and the vocals of Joey Belladonna having that more cleaner, higher register. This is like almost like Steve Perry from Journey singing over Metallica, almost. Because the thrash moments on here, when it gets thrashy, it thrashes with the best of them. It gets very fast because Charlie Benante is a hell of a drummer, and Scott Ian's one of the best rhythm guitarists in metal history. But songs like the title track, Caught in the Mosh, I Am the Law, and Indians are all standouts and staples to this day. But other tracks like Evil New Confession, A Skeleton in the Closet, Imitation of Life, which was probably the fastest song they ever did, or one of the fastest songs they ever did. So yeah, when it gets thrashy, it gets thrashy, but there's great melodies, great hooks, vocal moments. So if you're more of a fan of melody and clean vocals, or cleaner vocals, Among the Living by Anthrax would be a great gateway into thrash through those means. So now these next two are going to be for more instrument-wise. So for this next one, what if this hypothetical listener is a huge fan of amazing drum work? Well, I think a great album. I could have went with Rain and Blood by Slayer for this as well, because Dave Lombardo's a fucking beast on the drum kit. But I wanted to give a nod to the Atomic Clock, the human drum machine, Gene Hoglan, and I think his best thrash performance would be Dark Angels, Darkness Descends. I just think not only does it push the boundaries of the more extreme side of thrash, but just the drum work. The drums on this album are so insane. Like I said, Gene Hoglan, one of the greatest drummers in the history of metal as a whole, as he is just going for it all, going as fast as he can, doing ridiculous fills, great double bass work, and really cool grooves even at times. But even the songwriting is absolutely incredible. Tracks like the title track, The Burning of Sodom, Hunger of the Undead, Merciless Death, Perish in Flames, Black Prophecies, where they kind of explored their more proggy side that they would go into on the next couple of albums. But yeah, this is a fantastic album, and if you're a fan of amazing drum work, Darkness Descends by Dark Angel would be the album of choice for that. Which now brings us to the final album. Let's say this hypothetical listener is a huge fan of amazing guitar work. Well, I think when it comes to who I think has some of the best guitars in all of thrash, can't look no further than Testament, and I went with The Legacy. Because not only is this maybe the best Testament album, but in terms of actual guitar work and thrash, there's fewer better than Alex Skolnick and Eric Peterson. That duo, with Eric writing some heavy and memorable riffs, but Alex Skolnick with those solos that just are a perfect balance of feel and technical execution. And he was a main ingredient of what makes Testament such an amazing band. Songs like Over the Wall, The Haunting, Burnt Offerings, Curse of the Legions of Death, Alone in the Dark, Do or Die, Apocalyptic City, First Strike is Deadly, Raging Waters, just every song. There's amazing guitar work. Like also in like Alone in the Dark, you get this like great melodic lead to start the track off before it gets into thrash territory. The lead work on this album's incredible. Like I said, Alex is just a beast on the fretboard. So yeah, if you are a fan of amazing guitar work when it comes to like hearing technical play, but also having that combination of feel in the solos, so that way it doesn't sound like complete wankery, but has something that can move you. I'd say Testament to Legacy is the album for great guitar work in thrash. And those were my 10 albums for recommendations to beginners that want to get into thrash. Now, I am willing to admit I was kind of reaching on a few of these because honestly, when it comes to like extreme metal, you have to at least be a fan of thrash in order to get into the more extreme stuff in metal out there, considering thrash was kind of like the founding father of extreme metal to some degree. But there have been times where I've heard people say that they listen to death metal and don't listen to thrash, or they listen to black metal and don't listen to thrash. It's weird how that works, but I have run into some people, or I have talked to some people that do feel that way. But I wanted to definitely help get more people who are like, say, like classic metal fans or prog fans that aren't into thrash, to get them into thrash. And I feel like these 10 albums definitely represent different tastes and different tastes and different strokes for folks, so to speak. So I'm leaving this a thread open to you guys who out there make videos and want to make a response, like Necrotic Nick or anybody else from Thralls of Metal, the Dark Path, or Dreadful Minutes, Metal Madness, pretty much anybody who watches these videos that make YouTube videos. I'd like to see you guys give me your responses on what 10 thrash metal albums you would recommend for a beginner. But for those who know about these albums, let me know in the comments below what you think about these 10 albums. And even to some of those who probably are now getting into thrash after watching this video, let me know how your experience was. Not sure what genre I'm going to tackle for the next episode of this series and when that will come out, but I'm hoping I can do it justice. But until then, horns high, and I will see you soon.
At the ballpark, someone's gonna put lasagna.
I took a tomato.
Okay, yeah, it's Levi. It's Levi.
Damn it.
I'm done. Could I?
I want to know what he got for this one.
Alright, Seth, let's go to Tomato Town.
I would like a single slice of your greatest tomatoes
I
in
would
the
like
park.
your finest tomato, please.
Calm
down, Seth.
Who hasn't voted? Somebody vote.
No, it's
Levi.
five is the
Levi's the one that has some
Five
votes.
is the majority.
Yeah.
Oh
my
my.
lord.
That's breathe.
Oh.
Tomato. I would be really interested to see these prompts.
Yeah, like
Officer,
literally
please
the
escort me out the
fucking-
ballpark. I just wanted to eat my tomato.